Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Strategy International podcast. This is the podcast produced for Strategy International, a global think tank and consulting firm that brings together great minds from all over the world to discuss, analyze, and collaborate on matters of global interest, such as international politics and policy, security and defense, the economy, the environment, and much, much more. I strongly encourage you to visit strategyinternational.org, where you can get more informed on all the wonderful things happening over at Strategy International, as well as the entire back catalog of all these wonderful productions. Speaking of great minds, we have another great guest today on the show, and as you can notice, this is a different setup because for the first time ever, this guest is actually in studio. A good friend of mine, Rudy Husny, who was a former political advisor over at the Canadian government, and he's currently he works as a media analyst on various media all across the country. Rudy, thank you so much for doing this. We've been trying to do this for quite some time. I appreciate the fact that you took time from your extremely busy schedule to be here, man.
No, thank you, George, and it's a pleasure being here.
What we're going to do today, we want to do an episode that focuses primarily on Canada. We're not going to go obviously throughout the whole history of Canada, but we have noticed that in the last couple of months, maybe years, there's been quite some negative press around Canada, whether it's domestic or international. And we thought bringing a guy that has the knowledge and the experience to discuss why this is happening, the different trends around Canada, and just to give the listeners and the viewers more of a global portrait of what's been happening in Canada. Before we get there, though, let's just you and me talk, because we go back a little bit. I don't remember how long ago it was, but I do remember meeting you quite some time ago. And it may have been during a political event. I don't remember. And it's funny, given all the circumstances now with what's going on in Israel. I think the first time I met you, we were at the Action Party, that is this huge event that is organized by the Canadian Jewish Political Affairs Committee here in Montreal. And I think you were probably accompanying your boss at the time, Minister of Industry, Federal Minister of Industry. I was probably accompanying my boss.
International Trade.
International Trade, sorry.
Yeah, and I'm sure we met at a few Greeks parade in Montreal also.
Exactly. So there's a bit of a history there. Just to introduce you to the world, how did this all start with you? How did you get involved in politics? Why did you do it? When did this happen? That whole interest, how does that happen?
Yeah, look, I'm trained as an accountant, but I always paid attention to politics, to history, and I decided that I wanted to become a candidate. I thought that the best way for me to really see, if I had it in me, if I was able to, go walk and talk to people and debate, other politicians. So I decided to go in a very tough riding in Montreal, which is called Outremont, which at the time was Thomas Mulcair was the NDP, from the NDP, was the current MP there. And he's known as one of the best debater in French and in English. He's completely bilingual. So I decided, I had some roots, obviously, in Outremont, but I decided that I would start by, becoming a candidate. And I said to myself, look, as a current MP, he needs to at least give me one debate. That's, the rule. Normally, there's always a local debate. And I said that will be, my test. If I'm able to hold the line and, see what's his message and trying to, being able to see if I'm a good debater. And what happened is that not only that we did one debate, I think we did 7, 8, or close to 10, because the Conservative Party told me, look, you did great. Wherever Thomas Mulcair goes, you go. So for a whole 35 days of the campaign, or 40 days of the campaign, I was like his shadow in every TV or radio show or debates. And after that, the Conservative Party said, look, what's your training? And I say, I'm an accountant, graduated from business school. And they say, you have a French accent. And I say, yes, I studied in Europe. And they say, perfect. We are negotiating the Canada-EU trade agreement, and you should come and become a political staffer. And as you know, Europe, that will be perfect. So I was put on the Canada-EU trade agreement negotiations. Did that for 4 years under Minister Ed Fast, who was the Minister of International Trade. And, from 2011 to 2015, it was a majority government of the Harper government. And we did a lot more. We did Canada-EU, we did Canada-Korea, South Korea trade agreement. It was also the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So it was a great moment. I was very lucky. It was a good timing. And that's my experience in politics and in government.
We should also mention that in the last leadership, the previous leadership race, the one right before the 2021 elections, you had also found the courage to present yourself as a leader in the leadership race of the Conservative Party of Canada. Of course, COVID happened, and it came and disrupted a lot of people's plans, yours as well, I imagine, and that didn't work out. But ever since that leadership race, and more specifically the following one in 2021-22, you've had a significant presence in all these media, and I've been following you, and it's quite spectacular, especially when you know someone and you see them a little, progress, and to see them grow in whatever environment. It's been very refreshing. And we were talking about this before we recorded, that there isn't that many conservative voices commenting on mainstream media, and if there are, they were probably a very long time ago, and they've kind of been immersed more and more into like this media kind of mentality. So they figure out a way to kind of hold that objective line, and it's refreshing to have this point of view. Not because I share the conservative ideology, but just because it's good to see, especially in mainstream media, which is highly debated right now, especially in Canada, to have these different points of views and these voices.
Yeah, look, you mentioned I did run for leadership of the Conservative Party. My goal was that the Conservative Party of Canada cannot call itself a national party if we didn't have a Quebecer in the race. And that what happened. It was under Aaron O'Toole and Peter MacKay. And I just said, look, if we need to, as you know, in Quebec, Conservative, we don't have a good track record when it comes to having seats in Quebec. The maximum is we had 12 seats out of 78 in 2015. So that's why I decided to run for the leadership of the Conservative Party, because I said, look, I need a Quebecer. We need a Francophone in this race. At that time, Peter MacKay and Aaron O'Toole were not fully bilingual. So I said, how can we convey our message to all Canadians if we don't have at least one Francophone in the race? As you mentioned, COVID hit, and I withdrew from that race. And yes, since then, I've been trying to be a political media analyst, a conservative one, obviously, because, people are saying, I don't believe in media anymore. They're skeptical about the media because they feel that their point of view sometimes doesn't have the same space as others. And that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, I could start a YouTube channel in my basement, or I say, look, I'll play the game, go in mainstream media, because I do think that otherwise, it's if not all points of view are debated, or at least, people can say, okay, at least it's a balanced panel. I hope that it can help that people are not, as I said, take a distance from traditional media in a way, I would say.
Why do you think that there's been this distance? Why do you think that over the last couple of years, probably even decades, I'd say, the conservative voice is missing from mainstream media? I'm not suggesting that there is no conservative voice, because if you move more west into Canada, the media tends to to get a little bit more on the right side of the spectrum, which is normal because it reflects pretty much the electorate, which that's pretty much where the Conservative Party's base comes out from. But let's not also forget that there was a former Prime Minister of Canada in the 80s that won pretty much the entirety of maybe not the entirety, but he had the majority of the seats in Quebec. We're talking about Brian Mulroney in the early 80s, all the way until the early 90s, I believe. And so there is a history over there of conservative support in Quebec. But Why is it that isn't reflected in mainstream media?
Yeah, look, it's first of all, it's tough to be it's tough to be a conservative in media because normally people are more center in the media. They don't want to have certain point of views, and also it's like. I feel like, especially in Quebec, if you are for the sovereignty of Quebec, it means like you have a heart in a way. If you're a socialist, it means you care about other people. But if you're a conservative or you come from the center-right spectrum, they feel that your point of view is not equal to them, or in a way that, you don't care about other people, because we believe in smaller government, we believe, in less intervention, where some conservative are more fiscal, other are more libertarian. So in a way, it kind of, the message is not the same. So it's easy for others to basically attack you by saying, oh, you don't have the same level of solidarity than other parties, which is not true, because the conservative views is that, look, we're not against, redistribution of wealth and money, but we have to create it. And the problem is that to create, we need business. That's why naturally we're pro-business in a way, because we do believe that, people need to pay taxes and to pay taxes, it means they need to make money to after, we can fund our social programs. So that's why it's a bit difficult. And that's why I believe in a way some people are just saying, look, my point of view is not represented. It's always like, oh, you should think one way and there's no other, other point of views. And that's why people are saying, look, I'll stop listening to that, because it's always sometimes the same views on certain topics and they cannot be challenged in a way.
And we're going to talk a little bit about this labeling that the Conservative Party has received over the years as we move forward into, later on into strategy, because I do feel that, especially coming from the Liberals, the Conservatives have been painted, like you said, as people that either don't care about social issues or that don't care about different other interests, depending on the province. And we're going to get back to that when we come. But let's talk a little bit about Canada, and just to bring people up to speed on what's been happening and why there's been, at least, I think, since the election of the current Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, there's been a series of just negative press affecting the government, which is completely natural. I mean, there comes a point where, there's fatigue and there's more screw-ups and there's more obstacles along the way and there's more scrutiny that affects the government. So naturally, this tends to happen. It's very cyclical. But normally when that happens, it doesn't affect, at least not Canada, at an international stage. We've seen these things, and it has been cyclical, but it's always domestic issues. It's little different things that seem to just affect the population and the government. But this time around, it's not only international, but it's also at an embarrassing level. So we're going to get to that. But before we get to that, let's just set the table, put everything in context. 2015, Justin Trudeau gets elected. This is a young guy, a good-looking guy, a popular person, the son, obviously, of a former prime minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. This is also the guy that, truthfully, he brought back his party from nearly destruction. I mean, the fact is that the early 2000s were destructive for the Liberal Party of Canada. A lot of members had lost their trust. There was a whole situation with the sponsorship scandals. In any case, we're not going to get there. But one good thing that we have to give Justin Trudeau is that he completely revived his party in terms of branding, in terms of anything you want to call it, money, members, everything seemed to be going well. Here he comes in 2015, gets elected, and I'll give you one quote. And this has been, in my opinion, a highly published quote from Justin Trudeau in his inaugural speech when he gained the control of government. He said, "Canada is back," as if to suggest that before that, the Conservatives had dug Canada into some hole. In any case, they gave him the benefit of the doubt. Oh, okay, cool. Canada is back. Yay, Justin Trudeau. He served pretty high for a long time, Justin Trudeau. And honestly, I think it's just the last couple of years where it's been really troubling. So, we're just going to go into some of these things, both domestically and foreign, so that the people listening and that are watching can somewhat understand where things went wrong and why. And I'm going to start with the public finances, because I think that's pretty much the main issue that has worried a lot of the population. And as I was thinking about what we're going to discuss, and this Canada is back, I remember Justin Trudeau in 2015 in that election very specifically saying that he was going to run very mild deficits and bring back the books to balance the books again for the upcoming election in 2019. I believe, unless I'm wrong, that was the first and only time the word balanced budget actually came out of Justin Trudeau's mouth. And in 2019, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we were in the negative by 80 billion or 70 billion, somewhere in that realm. And it's quite fascinating because at that same exact time in 2014, so a year before him, over at the provincial level in Quebec, we had gained government, we had gained power. And I remember that strategy was the complete opposite of Justin Trudeau's. I remember back in the day, the Premier of Quebec, Philippe Couillard, had specifically ran a campaign on fiscal prudence and limiting government spending so that we can get Quebec's credit score improved. And in fact, those 4 years of that provincial mandate was record numbers in Quebec's recent history, with 4 consecutive surplus budgets, a record number of investments. Employment was at a record low. For the first time ever, Quebec had a better economy than Ontario. They were borrowing money at much better interest rates. Things were going well for Quebec. And I remember specifically in 2015, Justin Trudeau gets elected, and in a scrum meeting at the Parliament, they asked him to comment on Quebec's fiscal policy. And I'll never forget this. I was in my office where I was watching the TV, and they're questioning Justin Trudeau, and he criticized Quebec for that approach. And he said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to indebt our people like certain provinces have been doing, et cetera, et cetera. And 4 years later, when you saw the results that came out of Quebec versus the negative results that came out of Ottawa, it was a stark contrast on how things worked out for Quebec and how things did not work out for Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting because as you just said, in 2015, the Harper government had balanced the book. That was one of the biggest commitment of Stephen Harper. He said we will balance the budget, and he did. And in that election, if you recall, Thomas Mulcair, who was the leader of the NDP and he was the official opposition, did also propose a balanced budget, which never happened for the NDP, right? The NDP are the socialists, they never proposed a balanced budget, but he did. And Justin Trudeau and the Liberals in that election, they did propose a deficit. And as you rightly said, modest deficit, that's the term he used. And that was like a big contrast, from the Conservative to the Liberals and also the NDP. But don't forget that in the Liberal Party of Canada, there's a history of also balancing the budget, from Jean Chrétien when he was Prime Minister, from Paul Martin when he was its Finance Minister, but also as Prime Minister. So Justin Trudeau changed a little bit the DNA of the Liberal Party, because if you look at the Liberal Party today and the previous Liberal Party under Jean Chrétien, they don't have the same vision when it comes...
Completely different parties.
Especially on the economy, because they don't see, for example, balancing the budget as a priority. And in a way, I think that the Liberals, or Justin Trudeau in a way, they decided to take that gamble and say, look, forget the blue Liberals, as we call them, the Liberals who believe in balanced budget, like John Manley and others like that, and let's just go and trying to go more to people who are more on the left side and maybe eat some of the NDP voters. And that's exactly what he did. But now we're in a situation is that technically the economy is like, when the economy is doing well, you shouldn't be doing deficits. But he was doing deficits even when the economy was doing well. I'm talking about 2015, 2016, 2017, before the crisis and before COVID. But now everybody, and I think that's what, it's part of the problem that he's having right now in terms of credibility. It's because, yes, the government had to borrow a lot of money during COVID. It was normal. The debt has, doubled, during COVID. But he doesn't have a leg to stand on, because he was saying, look, when the economy was doing well, you were doing a deficit. Now the economy is not doing well, and you're doing a deficit. So there's no way, you don't have any logic, because you're always spending more. And I think that's now it explains why the Liberal Party and the Trudeau government, they have a credibility problem when it comes to the economy. Because when you look at the contrast, people do trust conservatives when it comes to the economy. It's the bread and butter of the conservative to say, look, trust us on the economy. I know there's other issues people or Canadians don't trust the conservative, but when it comes to the economy, they do. And look, when you look at what's happening right now, when it comes to inflation, when it comes of a possible recession, and all the economic indicators are in the red, and that's not a good news. And that's why I also believe that, yes, the conservative are very high in the polls right now, but I would say that it's more because the Liberals are not managing the economy well, and now the priority of Canadians is the economy, and that's why I think it's reflected in the polls.
You know, for the people listening or watching that aren't very much familiar with, the political tradition and history in Canada, and I'm going to probably go out on a limb to say this, but I do think that it's a fair statement to say that, and as far back as I can remember, since I've been following politics, whether it's been the Liberals or Conservatives in power, irrespective of people's ideology, there was always this sentiment that whoever was in power was going to take care of us. There was always this this overarching kind of belief that regardless of the party, there is always sound governance, whether it's the Conservatives or the Liberals. And I feel that trust in sound governance has diminished significantly, at least in the last couple of years, where you're mentioning that, yes, given all these metrics that we're seeing, there's been this loss of credibility. And I feel, and I've never seen this, he does all these public appearances, and we look at the crowd, and there's a lot of hatred, which we've never seen before. People are a lot more animated, and we see things that I have never experienced. And I've been around politics for quite a while, and it's normal to see certain people demonstrating, and that was always natural and normal, but not to the extent where it is now. And a lot of people are blaming that situation, but when you look at the flip side of the coin, there's something that must have triggered hundreds, if not thousands of people to react this way publicly against a leader, which never was the case before. And I think that there's this fear of being governed by a party or a leader where this concept of maintaining a sound governance is lost completely.
Yeah, I think the problem is hope. I think that right now Canadians, Quebecers and Canadians, there was kind of an unwritten rule, which is you study hard, you work hard, you get a job, you can buy a house, you will live better than your parents. There was always this hope. I know we talk a lot about the American dream, but there's also a Canadian dream, which is, you work hard, you play by the rule, you pay your taxes, you can afford a home, you can have a family, and, you will have a good retirement, and we have social programs that will help you when it comes to healthcare and other things. But right now, I think that it's broken in a way just because you feel that you're not going to live as good as your parents because you can't afford the kind of house, that your parents could afford 20 or 30 years ago or one generation ago. And I do feel that that's the general feeling that people are saying, look, what happened? Because we are still doing the same thing. We work more, we work hard, we are trying to make a living, but we cannot meet ends meet. And I think that's why people are reacting more by saying what's happened in Ottawa, what's happening in the government, or more what happened to Canada if, your most basic stuff, which is your basic need, which is afford a home. The home crisis is so huge now, and the prices has doubled, tripled, and so on and so forth, that I feel that's part of the main criticism of the current government, or just the general situation, is the lack of hope and the fact that the new generation, yes, unemployment is very low. That's a contrast from the 90s, for example. But at the same time, even if people have a job, they cannot afford a home.
Right.
And I think that's the main issue. And when people are being more polarized in the society, or feel more rejected, or are being more angry by saying, look, I did everything wrong. I did everything right, but I cannot afford a home.
Right. See, we're going to get to certain issues that have brought this negative press, obviously at an international level, but there's also domestic issues that have highlighted Canada on the world stage. The public finance, I don't think anybody really cares or looks at what's happening in Canada in terms of public finances. The inflation, of course, has hit everywhere. So obviously, naturally, it's hitting Canada as well. But there were a few things that happened under the Liberal government and that are still actually ongoing that have found a place in international media. One of which is the two bills, C11, C18. We can maybe explain to people what these are because there's a lot of worry in Canada and even abroad. It has been brought to question in certain foreign media about the individual rights and freedoms that Canada so proudly boasted since forever, and now they feel that has come to question. And obviously, COVID. It was a difficult time for I think every single country, but specifically over here. The trucker rally made rounds all over the world, and it had people questioning, "What is that really happening in Canada?" Not the fact that they're demonstrating; demonstrations happen all the time, but the fact that they were so hard on people that were out demonstrating. Bank accounts were seized. I mean, stuff that you would never imagine happening in Canada.
Yeah, but I think you're totally right in terms of the bad press that Canada received because of the convoy, and not on the roots of the convoy, but on the fact that how come the police, the city of Ottawa, the Canadian government, the RCMP,
they weren't prepared.
They were not prepared. Yeah. How can truckers all of a sudden just close off a city without nobody?
And it's not like from one to the next they appeared in Ottawa. They drove from across the country.
Exactly. It took 2 weeks for them to drive, certain from BC to Ottawa, and all of a sudden you're like, it was just the chaos and the embarrassment of all the agencies not being able to talk to each other, and the municipality and the police and the provincial police and the federal government and all those agencies. It was a major screw up in terms of how come you cannot block, how come trucks could block the capital of a country, and second of all, how you couldn't manage it and it stayed for as long as it did. So I think that was just total chaos, just in terms of an embarrassment of Canada, saying how come you couldn't manage that protest? Because look, in France they have protests all the time. It's part of their DNA, and all of a sudden we have one in Ottawa and they cannot manage it. And Ottawa is the capital. If there's a place you go to protest, is Ottawa. So if there's a city where they should be prepared for protest, it's supposed to be the capital.
Yeah, and I was always a little bit ambivalent with that whole thing, because I get the fact that they're frustrated, that they're tired. Everyone was kind of frustrated with COVID and all these measures that were put in place. But at the same time, having been in politics, having worked in politics, I completely understand this need that people have, and they should have, to demonstrate their discontent, and they should be able to do that. At the same time, I have a lot of friends that live in Ottawa. It was frustrating to have hundreds of trucks just constantly honking their horns. Businesses couldn't function. They had to close. It's frustrating. I get it. So I was kind of a little bit on the fence with that. But all this to say that they were in their right to demonstrate. And I know that they were painted as violent. I wasn't there physically myself. The only image that I saw that was considered as violence was someone putting a Canadian flag around the statue of Terry Fox, I think, and they said that, look at them, they're violent and they're desecrating statues. And I mean, to me, that was a little exaggerated. But all this to say that to go from that event to blocking bank accounts, that I never thought I'd see in Canada.
Yeah, and the fact that they had to use the law.
In addition, yes.
This law.
The Emergency Act.
The Emergency Act, which, there was a commission, and yes, the government was justified. The judge ruled on that the government was justified to use the Emergency Act in this case. But how can it happen? That's the whole thing. And forget about if the truckers were right or wrong. It doesn't matter anymore. But I just think that was one of the symbol of a failure of government, and that's why the Trudeau brand, in a way, got very hurt on that moment. And it's not because of the truckers themselves. It's just the mismanagement of that crisis. I think that if you look at the big picture, especially now with a little bit of, you can have a little bit more perspective. It's just that how come there were no leadership? How come there were no coordination? determination, how they lasted so long. That's the thing, because it's not the crisis itself. Protest happens all the time. I think it's just that how long it lasted.
Let's talk a little bit about these two bills that seem to have made a lot of noise internationally, C11, C18. C11 initially was presented as a law, as a bill to regulate large streaming platforms, and then C18 was basically in support of the media to kind of regulate the big players like Google and Facebook, and they've both turned things upside down.
Yes, and I think the biggest problem is that on principle, everybody agrees that, the Facebook, the Googles, and all the web giant, they need to pay their fair share. That's everybody agrees. But I think that the problem that the government is that normally, and that's from my experience in international trade and in foreign affairs, you don't do it alone. If you want to regulate, if you want to make sure that you put pressure on the Google, on the Facebooks, on the Twitter, and all of that, it needs to be multilateral. You need to have allies. Thinking that Canada alone is going to fight, against Facebook or Meta or Google, and they're going to win. I mean, I've read the Bible. Okay, yes, David against Goliath. But when it comes to international relations, it doesn't work that way. So I think that the government is now realizing that having principle is good, but principle is only good if you have allies around you. It should have been done with the European Union. It should be done in consultation with the US. I know there's always the example of Australia, who were able to have a deal, but it was a one-time thing that happened with Australia, and I don't think that Canada was in the right space and the right moment and had enough allies to make to fight against the web giant. And I think that now, we're losing in a way this battle, because we cannot post any media, any news article, even our own content. I mean, I'm a columnist for Le Devoir in Quebec, and I cannot share my own content. I'm the author. I'm not even asking for money back. I just want to share my column that I wrote myself, and I can't on Facebook and Instagram. So I think that the government is realizing that. I don't know if it's going to get resolved. And also at the same time, there's another bill, or there's another project which is to tax, the giant, web giant. And this one is being done, internationally with the countries of the OECD and all of that. And some countries are now saying, we're going to postpone it for another year because we haven't reached a consensus. And the Canadian government made an announcement saying, no, we will continue to do it alone, even if other countries are not pursuing this. And the US is saying, no, you cannot do it alone. We have to do it together. And still the Canadian government is not learning is that you need allies, and it needs to be done multilaterally. So when it comes to C11, when it comes to C18, and even when it comes to taxing web giants to make sure they pay their minimum, even that, Canada thinks they can do it alone. Look, we are a soft power. We like to call ourselves our soft power. I don't think that it's going to end well for Canada if we don't follow other countries and fight all together.
What's going to happen? We're going to get to that later when we talk about the opposition and the polls showing the Conservatives in the lead. But let's just finish up on this, because the latest, I believe, embarrassment in Canada, and I think that made press everywhere in the world, was the fact that they brought a Nazi in Parliament. They honored him. They applauded him. They gave him a standing ovation. And this happened during the visit of President Zelensky from Ukraine. And that was a complete mess. It was a complete mess.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're both former political staffers, and I remember that during election campaigns, I've been told that foreign affairs is never a top issue. Whatever you did on the international scene, and under the Harper government, for example, we did a lot of free trade agreements, but it never paid off. When it comes to an election. But I do believe that right now the Trudeau government is paying a price when it comes to failure on the international stage and on foreign affairs. As you said at the beginning of the show, Trudeau branded himself as Canada is back, that Canada was going to be on the world stage. And, under Prime Minister Harper, he did lost a seat at the Security Council. And Trudeau government was supposed to do better. The truth is he did worse than what Harper did. There was also this story with Saudi Arabia. You remember that Minister Freeland, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, now she's Minister of Finance, did a tweet to Saudi Arabia, and all of a sudden, all the relationship between Canada and Saudi Arabia got got stopped, and no countries were supporting Canada. They all said, look, this is a matter between Canada and the Saudi Arabia. We're not taking sides. So there was that tweet from Minister Freeland at the time. More generally, I mean, that's the problem when the Trudeau government, yes, on terms of the ovation of the Nazi, that's an embarrassment. But also more generally, when it comes to on world stage, look what's happening with China. The Trudeau government was very naive on China, and let's be very honest. I mean, first they say, we're going to do a free trade agreement with China. I know that file because under the Harper government, it was also a question. Should we do a free trade agreement with China? And the Harper government at the end with China discussed and say, no, we're not going to do a free trade agreement. You know why? Because to do a free trade agreement, you need to be at the same level. You need to trust each other. And there were no trust between Canada and China when it comes to, we were not at that level. Yeah. But the Trudeau government promised a free trade agreement. It was naive. And you know who rebucked it? China said, we're not going to do it. Yeah. And obviously, when it comes to Huawei, for example, it was the US banned Huawei, Australia banned Huawei, UK banned Huawei. Canada was the last country to do so. So how can you go on the world stage and say to your allies, we're playing in the same game, but you're not taking the same action? There was no trust also on the international trend because Canada was not, being truth when it comes to allies, and also on the military spending and on NATO and on everything. I mean, I remember that under the Harper government, we announced that we were going to purchase the F-35, the fighter jets. And Trudeau said no.
He came out against it, I remember.
Yeah, he came out against it. And 7 years later, what are we doing? We're buying the F-35. So how does the U.S. believe us when it comes to security and, when it comes to NORAD, for example? So I think that, there's a lot of example of the foreign affairs or the policy when it comes to the Trudeau government on the international stage. It was a lot of virtue signaling. And there's a limit to virtue signaling. Because if you're not putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to military spending, or even, I think that Canada under the Trudeau government is the lowest number of UN casque bleu.
The blue helmets.
Yeah, the blue helmets. It's the lowest, even under the Harper government. They were saying, the Harper government, we're going to change everything. So I think that on terms of international stage, yes, Ukraine was an embarrassment in terms of having a Nazi when the president of Ukraine was in Ottawa and honoring a Nazi. But I think that it's more part of a larger narrative when it comes to the Trudeau government on international stage. Because, look, there's China, we don't have a good relationship. There's Saudi Arabia that we had problems for a few years. Obviously, now there's the crisis with India itself, and we can talk a little bit more about it. We are not spending the money we should in terms of military and spending. We are not modernizing NORAD. And don't forget, Canada, we have the Arctic. And this is going to be one of the main topics of the future because there's natural resources in the Arctic. There's vessels now that are crossing in the Arctic. And how is Canada going to protect its sovereignty against Russia and China, for example, if all of a sudden they come with a vessel? And I think that nobody is paying attention to that, and they should, because that's also one of the main topics. And look, I remember that under Prime Minister Harper, every year the Prime Minister used to go and witness military exercise in the Canadian Arctic, just to show the world that, we're taking that seriously. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Trudeau stopped traveling to the Arctic, to the Canadian Arctic, or just to be present for those military exercises, which, sends also a strong signal that we take this issue seriously.
Yeah. And there's another question mark because just recently the government announced that it was cutting back on, I think, $1 billion from its military budget as well. So God knows how that's going to evolve up there. But since we're talking about the international flops, there were major agreements that were happening, like the Indo-Pacific Partnership, which Canada joined in at the very end. It was pretty much settled, I think, when Canada came in. There's the AUKUS agreement between Australia, the UK, and the US that Canada is missing from. And yes, there's issues with India as well. And those, again, it's a huge question mark because of domestic issues happening in Canada that have affected the relationship at an international level.
Yeah, the TPP, I believe we joined at the same time as Mexico. Okay. It was under the Harper government. I believe it was in 2012.
Okay.
It got closed in 2015. It got settled. Actually, it was settled during an election. It was the first time that Canada signed an agreement during an election period. But just to correct the fact, yeah.
There you have it. So there seems to be this absence of Canada at an international stage, and I was shocked when the AUKUS agreement happened. I was like, hold on a second. You have an agreement that's happening with partner countries in the Pacific region, and you have the UK signing this, which has no access to the Pacific Ocean at all. And you're thinking, where is Canada in all of this?
Yeah, look, it's true. Even President Biden made a new initiative in Asia, exactly, a new Asia-Pacific strategy itself. And also Canada is not part of it, hasn't been invited to it. So it's like people are forgetting that we have a Pacific coast, that we are a Pacific nation. Yes, look, AUKUS, there's as I just mentioned, there's also the Quad, for example. Quad is Japan, India, Australia, and the US, which is a security dialogue. Canada is not part of it. And now, right now, with what's happening with India, and I just want to talk a little bit about that because, yes, I mean, the Canadian government had to denounce what happened. I mean, we cannot tolerate, and that's blue or red government, doesn't matter, the political stripe.
Just for the benefit of people listening or watching, there was a Sikh Indian in British Columbia, it's a Western Canadian province, that was murdered. And there is intelligence that seems to point to the fact that the Indian government may have been directly involved in this murder.
Yes, and it was right for Canada to denounce it and to call it. But I would say that it was done in a bad manner, and I'll explain why. Because normally in diplomacy, you leave yourself open doors and way to escalate the problem. But when Prime Minister Trudeau himself made the announcement, and not the Minister of Public Safety, for example, or the Minister of Justice, you kind of basically go straight to the top. Who's the counterpart of Prime Minister Harper? It's the Prime Minister of India.
Trudeau.
Sorry, Prime Minister Trudeau is the Prime Minister of India. So now there's no relationship. There cannot be any relationship. If it would have been dealt with the Minister of Public Safety, raising these concerns and making it public, after it leaves the door for the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister to continue a dialogue. But when it was escalated straight, and it's Prime Minister Trudeau who made the announcement, the question is why did he make that announcement? I think it was a mistake. I think it all happened because you recall that we had a lot of problem with Chinese interference in Canada in the last few months in terms of the Chinese government having agent in Canada, doing intimidation to MPs and all of that.
And this goes back to the elections, to the 2019 election.
2019, 2021. And also, obviously Canada's stand when it comes to denouncing the Uyghur treatment in China and all of that. And the government, and even the Prime Minister Trudeau, said that he read that in the newspaper because it was the new Globe and Mail and Global who broke the news. So I feel that they acted in a way, they say, we cannot let it break in the news. We need to ourselves make the announcement. But I think that now the reality is that he made the announcement. It should have been lower than a Prime Minister level announcement. And now we're also going to have a lot of repercussion when it comes to Canada-India relationship. You already see it. There's no more visas for Canadians to go to India. Now there's more than 40 diplomats in New Delhi that have been called back to Canada, that India say no more than, I think, 50 diplomats. That, so it's going to...
There's even a travel advisory for Indians that want to travel to Canada, which obviously makes no sense when you look at it from our side of the spectrum, but it just goes to show how serious this conflict is between these two countries.
And again, I mentioned the fact, we're talking about the web giants that, in international relationship and in foreign affairs, you need allies. There's no allies when it comes to, this disagreement between Canada or this crisis between Canada and India, because the US are saying, yes, it's important, but they're not, calling on India to do anything.
Of
or
course
even
not.
The
I mean,
UK
it's a major partner. It's a major, not only for Canada, but for the entire world.
Yeah, because look, all the countries have been courting or are courting right now. India, the EU, the UK, the US, especially what's happening in terms of the war between Ukraine and Russia. Because as you know, India is benefiting a lot from this war because they get cheap energy. cheap oil, cheap gas from Russia to fuel their economy right now. And that's where they're one of the most performing economy right now. When you look at China, China doesn't have any growth anymore. Where is growth? There's India. And everybody want to be part of it, the EU, the US, and the UK. But now Canada is going to not be part of it because of that crisis. Not because on the fact that Canada shouldn't have denounced it, on the fact that it was denounced by the Prime Minister, which itself makes it very difficult to find a solution or just to find an end to this crisis.
So let's talk. We just went over all the different things that have been happening in the last couple of years that have contributed to this negative media towards the government. Obviously, that has had its impact in the polls. We're seeing the Conservative Party right now completely destroying, and they're leading, I think, over 40% approval rating across Canada. As an opposition, the role, and they struggled a little bit. They had two kind of interim leaders since 2019. They seem to have found one leader that has managed to really penetrate that armor that Justin Trudeau had, and that seemed to protect the government for a long time. How do you see this happening? Because not only is the Conservative Party doing well, but because the Conservative Party is doing so well, we're going back to what we were saying initially, where the population now seems to have been greatly polarized. Like there seems to be that middle ground that everyone kind of was sort of found in the past, where what we said about there's always sound governance, and irrespective of the ideology, we know that we're in good hands. It feels that has completely disappeared, and you either have to camp yourself all the way to the left with the Liberal and the alliance with the NDP, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, or in what the Liberals have painted or have labeled the Conservatives as extremists, right? So I don't think that that's right necessarily, but how do you see it playing out from here on?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, look, you know that the job of the opposition is not to win an election. It's for the government to lose and to make a desire for change. It's always a desire for change. That's how a government loses. That's why I'm saying it's not going to be the Conservative winning. It's going to be the Liberals losing. And it happened in 2015 the same way. People were not always voting for Justin Trudeau. They were voting against Stephen Harper. And in the past, it happened also with Jean Chrétien and all the previous prime ministers. So the case that Conservative must do is a case for change, that they cannot afford 4 more years, that, especially, for example, on the world stage, do you want Justin Trudeau to represent Canada for another 4 years with all the embarrassment that we are experiencing? So I think that's number one. Also, I think that his brand now is not working anymore, because Justin Trudeau has been, I'm sure, the Prime Minister of Canada with the most exposure in the world, but also in Canada. And people after a certain time gets tired of that. It's just basic marketing, right? His brand, I don't think that his brand now, especially with the economic crisis, especially with inflation, especially with housing, people don't see him as the leader, I believe, that it is needed, especially in this time of crisis and of geopolitics that is very, very difficult. So I think that, in 2015, it was sunny ways. Do you remember?
Yes.
It was sunny ways, and everything was going to be fixed, and we were going to plant 2 billion trees, and everybody was clapping. And now we realize that, I don't believe they planted 100 million trees out of the 2 billion. So all of that is symptomatic of the branding that I don't believe is current to the Canadian expectations that they have, and they're just tired. I mean, after 8 years, look, John Manley, who's the former Minister of Finance, he said it's like the Jerry Seinfeld. He said Jerry Seinfeld had 9 seasons, but after 9 seasons, he said, "Look, I had enough. It's difficult. It was a good show, but I'm stopping." And he made the statement by saying, "Look, when you look at all the previous prime ministers, Stephen Harper did 9 years, Jean Chrétien did 10 years, Brian Mulroney did 9 years or 8 or 9 years. This after 9 years, it's very difficult to continue to be in power. I don't believe that since the 1920s, there's been a prime minister who's been able able to do 4 mandates. So that's why also I think that the numbers are against him, and just the desire for change. I think that after 8 or 9 years, people just have a natural desire for change, regardless of political agenda or what's in the platform. They just say, look, it's time for you to go.
From a strategic point of view, however, and this has been something that the Conservative Party has been criticized about, for wanting to create this big tent party where you have progressive conservatives, where you have more social conservatives, and that kind of branch of the Conservative Party doesn't sit very well, especially in Eastern Canada. And I think that has been primarily the reason why the Liberals have been painting the Conservatives as extremists, right? And we know that every time elections come around, the topic of abortion comes around, and gay marriage, and all these things come, surface up to come up to the surface. And I think, and I could be completely wrong, but the fact that Justin Trudeau has pulled his party a little bit more to the left with the kind of this coalition that they have, or this this agreement that they have with the NDP. Is there a possibility that he can dip into that vote that's more positioned to the left to counterbalance any additional vote that the Conservatives might be able to go pick up? Is that sort of the strategy? I just want to pick your brain a little bit on how you see, let's say there was an election in a couple of months from now.
Yeah.
Given this movement that has happened on the spectrum, where I think that there's no more middle ground and there's left or sort of socialist versus what they paint as extremist, and that keeps coming back every single election. It's like, is this what you want? You want people that support Nazis, right? We saw that, but unfortunately now they can't use that argument because they're the ones that brought the Nazi in Parliament. So that argument is finished. But it feels as though that he has stretched so much to the left to create this contrast between what they've been labeling the Conservatives to be. And I'm just thinking of it purely as, from a strategical point of view. Is it working? Is it going to work in favor of Justin Trudeau?
Look, that's the key question, because what's hurting the Conservative right now, it's the American politics. It's what we see at the south of our border. And the Liberals are always saying, we don't want to import American politics to Canada. But they are doing it because what they do is to kind of put the same labels that they are in the US to Canada when it comes to abortion, when it comes to LGBTQ issues, when it comes to gay marriage and all of that. They try to paint a picture that the Conservatives are like the Republican, and what the crazy things you're seeing right now in the US, can happen in Canada. But I don't believe that it's going to work, because it's a stretch. I mean, come on, to say that Pierre Poilievre, and the Liberals, they have tried that, but I don't think that it was effective. They tried to say that that's Trumpist policies and things like this, but I don't think that Canadians see it that way. I mean, you cannot compare Pierre Poilievre to Donald Trump. I don't think there's this comparison. Look, when you look at the past, and let's be honest, Andrew Scheer lost the election also in the East because of his personal beliefs when it comes to abortion. And that was true, and that's why, that was difficult. On the other hand, Erin O'Toole didn't have the same issue, but still didn't win. But now I think that after 8 years of government, and I come again to the fact that I believe the case is to make an election for change. The Conservative and Pierre Poilievre, they have some chance to be in power. But yes, the Liberals will try to use any opportunity, as they've done in the past, to bring debates on terms of social issues in Canada, and trying to make a link between what's happening, the craziness in the US, with what's happening in Canada. But the truth is that the Conservative Party of Canada, we come from the British Tories. And I say that's the history. It's not a link with the U.S. Republicans. It's where they are more linked to UK politics than American Republican, especially the Republican Party of in the U.S. right now, which is all the issues that is going on. So I think that's what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to scare Canadians and say, look, it's going to be a black hole if the Conservative come back. They're going to cut and austerity and all of that. But I do believe that it's going to be difficult to put that labeling on Pierre Poilievre. Look, even in 2011, I remember I was part of that election. The Liberals were saying hidden agenda. That was always their thing. Don't trust the Conservative. If you give them a majority government, they have a hidden agenda.
Yeah.
And nothing happened between 2011 and 2015 when it comes to gay rights, abortion, or any of those issues.
Yeah.
So there's a track record when it comes to a majority Conservative government, and nothing happened when it comes to social issue. But look, it's part of their game plan, and for sure they'll try.
A key right now that I want to leave the Liberals and Conservatives. I want to talk a little bit about the NDP. The NDP is the New Democratic Party, and they're pretty much holding the key right now because since the election in 2021, Justin Trudeau got a minority government. He managed to make this alliance with the NDP where they would collaborate on certain issues, for example, passing a budget, just so that the government won't fail and be launched into another election. And I'm not sure I understand. I mean, I understand it from the Liberal perspective because they can eat their lunch completely. But from the NDP perspective, what exactly is the strategy over there? Because you have Jagmeet Singh, who is the leader of the NDP, who has himself lost a little credibility as well, because everything that's been happening right now and everything that he's using to criticize the government, well, he's been a partner of. So I don't understand how this is going to evolve, especially as we approach elections. I don't know how long this alliance is going to last to begin with. I don't think Justin Trudeau wants to go in elections right now, so I think he'd probably want to stretch it as much as possible until 2025. But at the same time, if you're in the NDP, you're thinking, do we want to reach 2025? Because then we're in trouble. I mean, we maintained this government all the way until the elections. How can we kind of criticize them during the debates or whatever, during the entire election? So at some point, aren't they going to look to sort of break away from it? Do they have that luxury of breaking away from it? Are they prepared to make that move and go into an election? There's a lot of question marks on the side of the NDP.
Look, I know this podcast is called Strategy. I do believe that the NDP's move was the worst strategy ever, because talking about giving away all your leverage. The rule of a minority government is that you need to find at least one party who's able to support you. And sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to interrupt you because do you think that there was ever going to be a situation where the NDP would have ever gotten any of their programs approved?
Yes, because at least, you can fight every day. I mean, it's not by signing a deal, you sign over power in a way, because there's no way after the NDP can rip the document and say, okay, I'm going to challenge you now.
Right.
But if you go piece by piece, legislation by legislation, and saying, I need this now, I'm not voting for that, and, having the fear of an election or just, of having that leverage, the NDP gave away their leverage. And that leverage is what's part of the parliamentary system.
Right.
And that's why we don't have coalition government. We don't have a tradition of coalition government. We have a tradition of minority government that you at least find one partner. And sometimes it can be conservative, sometimes it can be the Bloc, and sometimes it can be the NDP. And that's how you normally govern under minority government. And exactly like you said, so now the NDP basically cannot take credit for any of the action of the government, even if it comes from their own platform, because Justin Trudeau just said, hey, I'm the one who did it, I announced it, I'm the one who cut the ribbon. And the NDP doesn't have the manpower, doesn't have the finance to go into an election. And even the polls are not
in their favor.
Not in their favor. So at the end, it's a lose-lose for them. I don't see a way that they can survive this in terms of the next election, because they cannot take credit for any of the action. As you rightly said, they look like their dancing partner. How can Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, can stand up in the House of Commons and criticize the government on housing, on inflation, or the cost of groceries, when actually it's because of them that they're still in power? It lacks credibility, and I think that they're going to pay dearly for that, because it's just they took their leverage away, and it was voluntary. There was no crisis or anything. Yes, they were afraid of the convoy at the time, but it could have been a piecemeal, like one time at a time, instead of saying yes, and that's a blanket agreement.
So obviously, and we've seen situations where things change so drastically in politics. If we're heading into the next election, of course, assuming from what you just said that the NDP is probably going to hold on to that agreement as much as they could, because they're obviously not prepared to launch a new campaign. anything can happen from today where they're both tanking in the polls, maybe not tanking, but at least they're not doing as they wish they were until 2025. Anything obviously can change. How do you see this happening? Do you see an election sooner than later? Do you see them taking it, stretching it all the way to 2025? And does Justin Trudeau stand a chance on bringing his troops back? And I'll just remind everyone that in the 2021 elections, and I remember because I was doing the podcast and I was interviewing a lot of candidates at that time, there was a period towards the end of August, because the election I think happened in October, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Towards the end of August, I believe, or early September, the Conservatives were actually ahead of the Liberal parties. And then naturally, I don't know what happened, but it was such a quick change in voter preference that Justin Trudeau maintained the power. So maybe something like this could happen again. I don't know. It just seems to me that Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has found himself a niche where he's talking about things that actually people can relate to: affordable housing, bigger paychecks, the respect of rights and freedoms because of these laws that we spoke about. I don't know if it's going to be easy for Justin Trudeau to turn things around. It could be possible. I don't know. I just want to pick your brain a little bit, see how you see this unfolding.
Look, first of all, I think that we have to point out that I talked about the brand of Justin Trudeau, but there's also a problem with the Liberal brand in Canada, because when you look at all the provincial elections, for example, the Liberals are not doing well also at the provincial level. Even in British Columbia, they took away their name. It was used to be called Liberal Party. They changed to BC United, for example. Yeah. We just had an election in Manitoba this last week, and there's only one MPP left. They had 3. So I think that there's a problem of the Liberal brand in Canada when it comes to the Liberal brand, because people don't know actually now what it means to be liberal. It means everything and it means nothing at the same time. It means you spend a lot, but you don't, you spend on everything and a lot, but you don't know exactly where it's going. So I think that's a problem that the Liberals need to fix in terms of what do they stand for? What are their priorities? Because when you have too much priorities, you don't have any priorities. Right. And that's a big issue. And even if the Liberals are announcing billions in one program or the other, there's also the credibility effect. And right now, people don't have a lot of trust in terms of, even if the Prime Minister announces, I don't know how many housing or how many billions for housing, I don't think that, he's getting the message out, because people are saying it's not going to work. So look, if the question, I don't believe there's going to be an election in 2023. I don't believe that there's going to be an election also in 2024. It all depends on inflation, I believe. I do believe that the economy, if the economy is going to get better in 2024, maybe there will be a window for the Liberals to have an election. But otherwise, as I said, in 2025, it will be like 10 years of the Justin Trudeau, and 10 years is a long time in politics. So it's going to be very difficult. Also, there's no renewal also in the Liberal Party. It's always, it's the same faces, it's the same ministers. Yes, they did a big cabinet shuffle in summer. It didn't have any effect, not even media-wise. Yeah. People are saying, look, you changed all your ministers, you did, 20 or 15 change in terms of portfolios, but it didn't have, any deliverables after that. So look, they're in a tough spot, but you should never underestimate the Liberals. They've been able, as you said, look, nobody expected them in 2015 to come from the 3rd place to the 1st place.
And Justin Trudeau, even as a backbencher before, to jump to the prime minister seat.
No previous experience as a minister or anything, just from an MP directly to prime minister. But again, it will depend, I think, on the economy. It will depend also on what's happening on the world stage. I hope that the situation is going to get better, but I don't believe it will in terms of crises that are still ongoing. But we're lining up for a 2025 election at this moment, I would say.
It'll be interesting to see exactly how things evolve. We can talk for hours, Rudy, honestly. We can go on the entire day if we had to. I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was a long time, and it's good to see you, first of all, in person.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm used to seeing you now on TV or listening to you on the radio, but to have you here in front of me, it's very refreshing. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for supporting. Do me a favor and head on over to strategyinternational.org to check out the wonderful things that are happening over there. Subscribe to all the social media platforms as well as the YouTube channel. And thank you all for listening. I'll see you all in the next episode. Rudy, thanks again for coming, man. I appreciate it.
No, my pleasure, George. Thank you for having me.